right, guys. Welcome to another Note to File Live. Appreciate you guys tuning in as I get the music to stop. Sorry about that. We have a great guest today, Christian Burns. I'm going to drag him on stage here. Christian, how's it going, my man?
Very well, Brad. Thanks for having me, and love the Kid Cudi, intro.
Got to go back. I didn't realize like how old that song is. Which makes me obviously feel old, but I mean it's like almost 15 years old, I believe, at this point. Doesn't feel like it was that long ago.
I would still jam out to it.
Right. Fair enough. I know we had you on the podcast before, and Zencastr gave us trouble. So anyone listening, just know that we did like an hour-long interview, and then the audio was not available. So in lieu of re-recording podcast, we decided to just do a live. And I think it's a topic a lot of people are interested in. Before we get there, though, let's tell people a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and kind of what brought you into the clinical trial space.
Yeah. Thanks again, Brad, for having me. And I actually was listening to you and Rick's recent podcast this morning, just kind of getting up to speed, and also just interested in the overall topic. So love what you're doing and challenging, the industry and things that we need to do and improve upon. And the only way to do that is start to talk about it, right? So to answer your question, I've been in research now for 15 years, 20 years, between 15 and 20 years. I should probably know that to the T. But I did not plan to get into research, so I stumbled into the industry like many have, and saw a fish oil sign and said get paid to take fish oil, and ultimately ended up kind of meeting the owner of a site and working with her and the site business that she had established, and really working just about every role at the site, until I wanted to start a business that supported those same sites, but have a more of a agile services solutions provider that could plug in and unplug based on the ebbs and flows of a site business. And that's when ClinEdge, of course, started. But outside of that, which I think is relevant to this discussion, I always have, I try not to say entrepreneur. I feel like we were talking about this actually in our podcast that didn't work. But I never really used the term entrepreneur. But what is relevant is I love starting businesses, teams, products, services. I don't know, just something about getting a group of people together to solve a problem and figure out how to best to do it. It's just been a passion since, starting a grass cutting company in high school, and then starting a promotions business in college. So just kind of always thinking about, what are people interested in? What are some gaps? What are some ways to solve the gaps? And hopefully I can do something about it.
Well, you certainly picked a nice industry to work in terms of if you want to solve problems, right? Because we got plenty of them, in the clinical research industry. So, I mean, to that end, something we're seeing right now is there's a lot of emerging site models. There's sort of a change from your more traditional standalone sites and even your bigger university academic medical centers, and we're seeing consolidation across a whole bunch of different sites. So this is something I'm really interested in. I don't know a lot about it. To your point, I don't really consider myself like an entrepreneur, even though I do run a business and do some entrepreneurial things. But I think like a lot of people in my position, like I'm more of a operator, I guess, right? I like to run sites. I like the very specific niche that I'm in. Mm-hmm. But we're seeing, I think, a real change across the site landscape. So, I mean, what are you seeing? Can you kind of comment on what's going on in the industry in terms of site consolidation?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the famous question. And, I think I could speak to it. And I think there's a lot of different perspectives on this as you do, as you have. But one thing, ClinEdge and, BTC, GuideStar, a couple of the companies that are now a part of Elligo, in total, even today under Elligo, we have hundreds of site businesses, so different types of site infrastructures that we work with. So when I think about my perspective, it's I'm usually plugged in when I'm trying to game plan with a site. How do we overcome some challenges? And many of them stem towards recruitment, as we know. So I think with the industry trying to improve upon patient recruitment and the site being at the focal point, a lot of business models are emerging. You have like pharmacy networks. You have this like DCT kind of network model, which I still think is getting identity, and still improving upon an identity. You have site networks that I think are expanding upon what they offer, how they offer. We know there's multiple different types of setups of a site network. And I think, you have research sites that are, so your standalone small business, research site. Since I've been in the industry, I think you've had an option to plug into, let's call it a network, but it was much more segmented. And, you had the pharmacies, for example, that, had a business development type relationship that was transactional. And I believe they still do that today, but, and, you had all of these different types of things that were offered to you. And I think now they're really being, bundled and wrapped up together where you can join and have a variety of these things available to you. And they take responsibility with you in a shared business model. Or there's there's an ownership type structure. Or there's taking full responsibility off your plate, but there's certain obligations that you have to meet, which might be, yourself as a physician. You're already working in the practice. So, I think I know I'm already perhaps getting too much in the weeds, but I
No,
find this
I
part.
think it's good. And honestly, that's a nice place to even before we get further. I mean, I talk to people who are trying to start sites or early on a lot, as somebody who's, been down the road. And I think it's something that you have to really consider starting out because it's a lot to take on at once, especially if you're coming in kind of cold, right? Like even if you've worked at a site for a long time, you may not know how to track down studies and take care of business development. You might not know how to negotiate a budget and contract. You might not know how to, take care of a lot of those things that are, obviously super integral, to building a successful site. That's a lot to take on. I mean, there's a lot of sites who simply don't know how to get studies. So they need to rely on an SMO or, I don't know, service provider. When I started, I used ClinEdge. So for the first, year and a half, 2 years, I used ClinEdge, tried to get in as many, study lead opportunities as I could. And then oftentimes over time, you learn that, build those relationships as a site. But I think it's something people do take for granted because it's not talked about that much, but it's, again, super,
Yeah.
it's easier said than done, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, it's hard work running a site. You have to wear many hats, and many businesses you have to do that in industries. But I think a site does have very specific niche, challenges, because not only do you have to get the studies, you have to get the patients, and then start.
Well,
It's
that's,
like
and yeah, I know for me, like starting out, it was like, okay, I got a PI or I got a doctor to agree. Woohoo, that's a win. Well, okay, but I haven't really gotten anywhere yet. Oh, okay, I landed a study. Great. Woohoo, we made it.
yeah,
Well, no, not really. No, we still have to actually enroll patients in the trial. And, I've seen, fledgling site networks even with, good backing and not understand that like just landing doctors and landing studies is not anything to get that excited about because ultimately unless you put patients in trials, you're not really gonna get anywhere. So that can be a hard lesson, I think, starting out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's to your, what you're basically stating is, to grow, you can take on more studies. Your options are: number one, take on more studies, or number two, can I maximize, the current trials that I have? And to I think approach either of those, there's a certain level of comfort that you want in that pipeline. Is it going to exist in, you know 3 weeks? Is it going to 3 weeks is, I'm saying that from a day-to-day standpoint. Is it going to exist in a year? Is it going to exist in 2 years? But that's the value of a network, is they should be. So, and Brett, this is when we think of why you join a site network. I can't tell you how many sites, even still today, to be honest, we may do 100% of their pipeline, and I think that's great. That we're able to do that. But I wouldn't have that expectation as a site. Because that means you're relying on a site business to do, 100% of it. And if you have a shared business model, where perhaps you're splitting revenue, perhaps you're contracting like ClinEdge was, which is more of a service provider. I would still always do your own do business development in addition to what they're doing, and use the organization to enhance what you're essentially able to do. So maybe you're going to tackle certain things, someone else is going to tackle certain things from that company. But if you're going to rely 100%, it does just make more sense to me when it's, I don't know, like, Elligo, we integrate with practices in hospitals where we are doing 100% of, the research and the focus outside of, the scope of work of those PIs, working within that system. But usually it's a smaller type of infrastructure. So 100% of the pipeline makes sense because we might only want to do a couple studies, for that practice or organization.
Yeah, but I think to your point, like, for me, it was important early to diversify those opportunities, right? It's like you said, I mean, you don't want to be too reliant on any one form of support, I guess, in an industry where, I mean, you asked the question, like, are we going to have this study in 3 weeks? I mean, that's a fair question. We've had studies disappear overnight, right? So it's very challenging to put too many eggs into one basket, especially, again, if you're, on the smaller side, you don't have, backing or, a whole bunch of runway to play with, which, those sites are still exist. We're still out here, these little revenue, sites that just live off the revenue they make. So I do love that. It's something I try to put in everyone's head, is diversify, your potential streams as much as possible. Again, easier said than done, but.
Yep. Now, let me ask you a question to your example. So let's assume you have 10 studies, and maybe one of those is a bit more of a unicorn. So you have the opportunity to generate significant revenue, significant patients too. Do you do 2 financial models based on the decisions you need to make as the business owner of that site? Where, what happens if this study gets on hold? Do you run those 2 analyses with perhaps yourself or to team members at your site?
I mean, possibly. And that's where, I've experimented, for sure over the last 5 years, which has been fun and probably frustrating for, some of my colleagues. But it's a good question. And I don't know that I have a perfect answer for it. I mean, I think it's worth looking at. I kind of want to go back even a little further if I can. I think something else I mentioned to site owners and something I've experienced a lot is that, I mean, what you're describing is like 10% of studies are like really move the needle for you as a site. I've always kind of, referred back to the 80-20 rule, but you're probably closer to the truth, and it's 10%, right? Like 90% of my trials are like, they're fine. They're putting along. They're doing okay. But it's those 10% that can maybe move the needle for you as a site.
Yep.
And when you talk in terms of, changing or experimenting with you mean like experimenting with the split on those, or, you know, reallocating more energy to your 10%, or I guess, what do you mean more specifically in terms of altering your arrangement with those?
Yeah. Sometimes I think, well, the 10% that you're referencing, which I think that's a good ratio. You're probably have an opportunity where maybe you could do 50 patients or 100 patients, but the sponsor may let you do 200 if you can, get your first 100. But if that study, but you might have to recruit, two more staff members, right,
Mm,
because of that type of trial. Um, so I'm just basically, when I say run a financial analysis, it's just more of your own analysis because you have some new business decisions potentially to make that's more ad hoc. Do you think
gotcha.
about, can I still sustain this if that trial gets put on hold or canceled?
Yeah, and we're going through this, or we just did recently. We have a very high volume, biorepository blood sample study. Basically, we're talking, we're already 700 patients deep almost. Well, we got another that's very similar that fits in, which we think we're going to be able to be just as productive on. It's already taking up more resources than, most of the other things. And I sat down with my
That's
team
good
and
that
I
it's
said,
700.
yeah, it's not too shabby. But I
Yeah.
mean, I sat down with my team and basically had the conversation like, what do you guys want to do here? We
Yep.
can, and for me, that's important because I'm small, and I
Yep.
don't want to make any decisions unilaterally. But it was more of like, we can hire some help. We don't know where that'll put us in 2 years, 6 months, even. We don't know where that'll put us, depending on what happens. Or, maybe instead we all buckle down, we all make a little bit more money, spread it out, and the expectations might be a little higher, but everybody gets more well taken care of. And if things go sideways, we're not any worse for wear. And again, maybe I have the benefit of being able to I have that much finger on the pulse of what's going on. Maybe a lot of big institutions don't, or whatever the case may be. But we decided not to hire a bunch of extra people and to try to manage it ourselves.
Just
But
keep doing it.
I do think those are decisions you have to look really closely at as a site, which again can be. I don't know. I think it's more challenging. It just, again, you can't
Yeah.
you can't hardly forecast like what's going to happen in a year. It's really incredibly challenging. Or maybe I'm just not good at it. Maybe I just haven't figured it out.
Well, I mean, I think with the example that we're using, and obviously, I think it's relevant to just growth. Yeah, today's discussion, just growing. How do you grow? And well, do I want to grow? How do I grow? What's the best way to grow? All these questions come up in my head when I think about growth, because growth doesn't mean always revenue necessarily. It could be that in this opportunity, this diagnostic trial, I assume, generates great revenue. That you probably have maybe 1-2 visits, perhaps for the patient. So it's easier on the transactional side. Perhaps retention's better, right? Because you got 1 or 2 visits. And here's an example. I don't have the data right in front of me, but the diagnostic market is supposed to continue to grow drastically over the next 5 to 10 years. So when I think about the decision that you're making with one study, what if you could have one of those studies always going on? How do you develop the infrastructure around that? What if you can get 2 of those studies?
Yeah.
And
Right.
I know planning is really challenging, especially for sites. You're in the rat race. You're running the business every day, and there's study stuff, and you're always a little bit behind. So when I say look forward, it's kind of like, oh, Christian, that's great. I wish I could look forward, but it doesn't have to be something that's like a budget, like you would do your budget for the year, and have all of this data available. I think it's just, you have to you know come up with something that you can stand behind, and then what do I need to work on over time to validate that, or maybe you're validating a couple types of I'm going to say models that to me are all different strategies of the business. And that applies to an exit. If there was an exit on the horizon, do you have a sustainable business model, and do you have a good plan? Is the plan being executed? And then you can, the next step would be, we get more into the weeds, but it's that when I look at that from a functional category standpoint, so the departments, how are they all individually delivering upon that plan? And do we have projected and actual goals that we're consistently reviewing? Because just to complete this, and I know we're just going on the diagnostic part, but like the way I've always thought, and I'm not sure if it's right, to be honest, but it's like it's up to me for that first next step of growth, especially when the business is small. So if I wanted to make sure we had diagnostic trials, one of two of them, I call it a unicorn for at least 2 years. I call anything a unicorn for 2 years because we just really don't know a lot. But it's like, hey guys, team, let's like kind of learn this, figure this out, and let's get our pricing down, let's get our budgets down, let's get our delivery model down. It might take us 2 years to do that. So decisions for 2 years might not all make the most sense to everybody, or could be maybe we have more wrong than right at times. We're going to pivot, we're going to move, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. I think that's just such an important thing in the day-to-day business to communicate with your team and people. But I also think if you were going to go for an exit, that's a big thing, because Brad's business might have sustainable therapeutic areas, sustainable delivery models for neurology, psychiatry, pain. And then he's got this diagnostic area that we're exploring, and it's the unicorn. We're still in this 2-year like philosophy. So now you take your internal way of communicating, and now that applies externally. And just, it's not recent anymore, but Elligo and ClinEdge, it was kind of the same way. Home health was our unicorn. We started home health. We started home health during when COVID came out. We always wanted to start home health, but obviously we expedited that quickly when we saw COVID's.
Good time to do it.
Yeah, COVID's impact. But like we landed a couple trials. I'll tell you, Brad, like the unicorn methodology, it was like it really stands here because I'm literally telling the team this could be the biggest thing we've ever done from a revenue standpoint, and it just married so well with all these other things that we did. But during that particular process, even with Elligo, we had to put that in its own category for conversation, where we had all of this, projected versus actual data across all these functional departments that we could basically say, look, here's what we thought we were going to do. Here's what we actually did the last few years. But we do have this unicorn over here that could be massive. We'd love to continue to kind of put resources and things to this, just to see that pan out, or maybe during our discussions, we don't want to do that, of course. So,
yeah, there's definitely a lot of decisions to be made. I do want to hit on a couple of comments here, Jeff. I find this interesting, and I feel this. Yeah, I feel this as a as a site. Like a lot of times, we don't feel like we have control over our pipeline. We're relying on things we don't even know about. To that point, speaking of this whole diagnostic area, we were working with another company. We hadn't even started. We had some nice projections. I get a call. This is within the last month. I get a call. We're done. We're cutting this program. Sorry, guys. You're SOL. Do you look? Every company obviously relies in any field on some degree on external factors, right? We can't control everything about our businesses. Do you think? Are sites in especially vulnerable place in the chain, considering they can't really generate their own business per se, right? Like we can only work with what is available on the market. So even if I wanted to do whatever neurology trials, well, I can only do as many as there are that exist. So
yeah,
does that put sites in a unique position?
Yes, but we have a lot of middlemen, right? And
that's true.
In research, even a network in a lot of respects could be a middleman.
Even what I do is, I'm a middleman in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's actually, I hadn't even thought of it to
I
that
mean,
extent,
if
but
a
you're right.
doctor wanted to do their own studies with their own staff, they could, but we're the sort of the guys in between. So
Yep. So the reason I answer it this way is because when I think of this, and as I saw Jeff's question come straight into the screen, is I do think that, not necessarily intentionally, but because of the middlemen and CROs and now DCT companies, again, not in a bad way per se, but when you're getting updates, you just notice updates are take longer, and perhaps are not as direct as they used to. I definitely feel that as well. Um, but I know when you can still go to the source, you do get an answer if the pharma company is able to. Small, mid-sized biotechs, though, they don't just, they have their stock, and if they say, "Hey, look, we're going to be delayed," and they didn't push out some sort of message to their investors, and perhaps they're
it's
publicly
a bigger
traded for
problem.
them, yeah, and I think people sometimes tend to forget that kind of piece. But you do have the indicators even from the response that you get that's like, hey, this study's probably going to be delayed. For example, the FDA said that you needed to, add two things to the inclusion exclusion for the patient population. Okay, 3 months at least, right? You can make that assessment. um, but the
Well, and
reality
I mean,
is,
all that is saying too, like as a site, you have to do your due diligence. You can't just
yes,
sit back and wait and accept that, something may or may not happen. Like to some degree, you've got to be maybe a little more aggressive in trying to chase down some of that info
yep,
if you want to really build with any or forecast with any confidence, I guess.
you're exactly right. And I just want to be clear, just so I don't get myself in trouble here with, you know, even our team, and I'm sure every company out there. I mean, sometimes I'm like, guys, give them more, give the sites more information on the response. And I see the response that we give, and it's like, it's not enough for the site to like plan or do a lot with. And I think that's just because we've gotten bigger, but we think about that as well. I mean, there's processes around like some of these things. So it's like, hey, we got to develop, we got to make sure we ask these questions to get this type this type of response. So if you get this response, did you ask these questions? Right? And just keep it simple. And just, I know that's just a consistent battle all the time. Um, but
Sure,
with that
sure.
with that said, I mean, the systems and processes at a site, from a pipeline standpoint, since we're talking about pipeline, you know, many sites still don't have a system to track pipeline, and I that's a huge thing. I think, outside of the CTMS, you have systems like Devana, that, or just freaking Google Doc. But
Well,
you
I
should,
mean, yeah, I mean, look, there's plenty of commercial like CRMs out there, HubSpot, and Zoho, all
yeah,
these. I mean,
yeah,
those
yeah,
that's what's interesting. I think that, uh, I mean, those are tools that are available for anyone. But I talk to a lot of site owners who have no idea about those. But those things are out there and exist. Maybe not. I like the idea of Devana because it is geared towards sites. So I haven't gotten too deep into checking it out, but I do like that idea.
yeah. It's a Salesforce based platform. So I don't have my own experience using it. I've heard good things. I like to share when I hear good things from sites about what they use. But I figured that they have to be correct. I am a huge Salesforce lover. We kind of build our whole
Yeah.
business off the platform. And from a pipeline tracking standpoint, task standpoints, it's amazing, which is that platform's built from it.
Well, and I guess all this that you're talking about is, it, I find, I mean, it sounds wrong and bad in a way, but maybe like some basic like level of sophistication some sites just don't have, right? But like if you're building and really wanting, you talk about exit. I do want to go into the weeds a little bit about that. I'm curious, and I've been approached, and I've talked to other small site owners who are interested in selling or what that might look like. I guess what else? I guess as far as like what's good for a site to really continue to build to position themselves for a potential exit down the road.
Yep. Yeah. Um, well, kind of again, as I started, I am not like a investment banker type of person. I consider myself as you, like an operator. But this is one area. Um, I felt I was not savvy in through ClinEdge, BTC, et cetera. So we did test the market. I'm going to say test the market because, you know, myself and Al Peters, who is my other co-founder, him and we wanted to understand our uniqueness and what we're worth. What do we need? What do we have? What do we not have? And we just tested the market, and that takes a lot of time, of course, to do that. But I'm incredibly happy that we did that. At least once, I think people should just investigate, and learn a bit more about what you specifically need. Have someone kind of, look at you and provide you some of that guidance. And I think investment bankers are actually a good, that's a good opportunity to use them, where they can advise on the next step. But that next step, I mean, even for us, we had investment banking support throughout years. And they knew we might not be ready forever. And they would still, continue to help us out. So point is, I think that's just one thing I would encourage those, because it's complex and it's a ton of work to get yourself ready for a transaction. And you want to make sure you're asking the right questions and you can spend time on it. So anyway, so just pushing that out. I think that when you structure, so first let's tackle like who's out there and who's buying. So I did pull some data, different than our last conversation, Brad. I connected with some people and did pull some data from those that track these things in the industry. And the number of site transactions, so 2018, we had 11, 2019, we had 13 in the industry. And then 2020, we had 4. So that's the COVID year, though.
Yeah.
I can see why.
Sure.
And 2021, we jumped up to 20, 2022, 28, and then we had 2 in January, and that's where the data stops. But as you could tell, site transactions are on the rise. And many sites ask me this, like, are you still seeing people acquiring sites? So obviously that hopefully answers that question. And then who's actually doing it? I'm seeing across the board private equity has significantly. There's a lot of companies. I've learned like a new company a week. It seems like, especially recently, that's interested in sites. I'll say that. Not that they've actually done a transaction, but they're interested in sites. They're interested in figuring out how to work with sites and perhaps roll up other sites, which is one strategy. Maybe they have nothing yet and they're going to fund multiple coming together, and they need some experienced people to really spearhead this kind of initiative. And then there's the other, which is there's experienced infrastructures, which are backed by private equity. That a couple of the site networks that are consolidating sites at rapid scale. It feels like that's going to continue because I think many of them, they're kind of looking for their next step themselves, and I think it's going to be interesting to see, especially as you have CROs that have always been interested in sites. But I think
that was kind of my question too. Like, what's the? I mean, obviously, whatever we say is speculation to a degree, but what's the end game for the people who are rolling all of these sites up? I mean, where are they going with it? Surely they don't want to run research sites forever. Maybe they do. Maybe it's a super great business model, and they're all making millions off of it. Who knows? But surely they have an end game. And is that selling to a CRO, or what does that look? What do you think that? To what end?
Well, I think from a pure speculation as well. I mean, I think that the marketplace and how to work with a sponsor with more of a patient-centric strategy that we know sites are at the focal point. I perhaps would say personally that's a goal that I think still has a lot of run to it, which would include, is the CRO model the right fit for the future of the study design, without getting too complex around that. Um, I think that there will be more disruption. I think we have these DCT companies that are, um, those are services and solutions that I think a multi-site network can pull in, and then how they can go directly to the sponsor and people plug into them. I tend to use these terms a lot. So, I mean, like, I think if people plug into you or you plug into them, and
Sure.
when people plug into you, it's a platform. And I think that that's what these site networks are doing. They're building a platform, and many of them still need to build out what they're offering, I think, to sites to be attractive to anybody. But I do think, to answer your question now directly, that some of the CROs that did take a chance on sites, I think they realized how complex it is to have 1, 2, 3 sites. I mean, you can't, I removed Brad from that site. It's a very different site the next day. So I
Well,
think
yeah,
that,
and no,
yeah,
that's an interesting and I think important consideration. And where I've had people, offer, you try to buy my site or buy, I'm like, what are you? I mean, what are you buying? In a lot of these instances for these smaller sites, I think it is like as much as this sounds like a dick thing to say, but like I am the business to a large degree, and there's relationships that that person is making with these physicians, with the sponsors, and if you remove them, to your point, it's a completely different business after that. I've always found it. I can have a hard time even wrapping my head around, like, look, not that I wouldn't take somebody's money if they offered me a bunch of money and I could go fishing all day instead of, running research sites. But, really, once you're removed, what value, I mean, or, is it going to lose value, but it just seems like a strange concept to me. And maybe I'm overthinking it, but
yeah. And I think investigating, though, the motivation is very important. And what's the strategy going to be? Because that's going to apply to how long, Brad, do I need you? If you, whether you want to be a part of it, post the transaction and for a while, or you're just going to be a part of it to see the change management, through, which but CRO, let's not just say CROs, but I think many people that were consolidating sites had that challenge where, how do you run a business when you have a lot of Brads, and if you move the Brads out, your patient care, everything changes, not just revenue, of course. I want to make sure it's definitely not just revenue that I'm referencing.
sure.
It's patient care. So I think, okay, well, how do you now achieve the business model? Well, let's look at the industry. We have more of, I'm not going to say a DCT study, but we have more hybrid trial structure designs that perhaps are more flexible for patients. And I'm saying perhaps because that's the goal, is we have more flexibility to patients, which might mean that there's more systems and processes in addition to the physicians and study teams' ability to see patients. So first, that's, do we see that continuing to happen over the next 5 to 10 years? And I think you would say yes. Many of us would say yes. Um, you know, but having said that, okay, well, which companies provide that entire journey, right? And that's now what I'm referencing, that I think is still has, if you go right to the sponsor and you can create and manage the entire trial. The CRO realm, as we know it today, is still very traditionally focused in delivery. The site is in they're in ground zero. They're on the front lines. So if I can work with many of these sites, and hopefully I can keep a lot of Brads to work with me, so we can execute this plan, which would be building something that creates a repeatable, consistent process that's around patients. And I just don't think we've achieved that at scale, the industry, that is. And I think CROs have tried it. A couple have tried it. But I think that's where some of these site networks are going, is they can
Yeah.
still pull in more that they're providing. And hopefully, I hope we see them continue to work.
Well,
Because
it gets
provides you
interesting.
more options.
I think I get kind of where you're going. I feel like, and even like, I don't know, there's a bunch of good questions and comments here. I do want to hit on some, Doug, Also, what's up, Doug? I always love your commentary. They provide a bit bridging service. So I guess my question to Doug's sort of comment, or my tack on, is like, for example, if you build up a big enough, let's call it a site network, you've got your own tech, you've got your sites. So you've got 100 sites networked together. Do you need a CRO? Can the sponsor not just go straight to a big site network? Now, there's obviously risk. We've seen what happened with, picking too many sites in one network. If things go sideways, we've learned a big lesson from that recently. But is that an effective possibility that you grow a site network big enough? Like, do we need another middleman, or can you go straight to one big site network and get everything done?
I mean, if we take out the term CRO and we take out site networks, if the sponsor said, I have this scope of work for this hybrid trial design, who can deliver it best? And I have these companies come in, and you have now the connotations come back of a CRO and perhaps a site network, enter the mix. I don't think that a site network today across all studies, I think certain studies in therapeutic areas and designs you can, but I think a CRO is going to blow that, still blow them out of the water from an RFI completion perspective and a complete infrastructure to support the trial. But that's where I think we will see change. And that doesn't mean the CROs won't be there by any means, but it means that they'll continue to optimize the way that they're also, conducting and managing trials, which would include our discussion. How do I work with sites in my own network? How do I partner with them? And do I need a deeper relationship, a deeper integration to be able to achieve that? I think both of those we will see happen.
True. Let's switch it up here. Also, Nelson, what's up? Also, love your contributions always. You have any thoughts about CVS Walgreens? I don't know why we're going 2025. Maybe there's something I don't know about 2025, but
that's Nelson's brain. I love it.
Do we know exactly to what degree CVS and Walgreens are diving into clinical trials at this point? Even is the roadmap clear?
So I'm familiar with what they're doing to a certain extent. I can't speak to the status of their business models, but I think they're on the front lines clearly at their names, but they're not just them. There's another company that I'm actually aware of called RxE2 that works with the small to mid-size pharmacies in a similar type of model. And they're pharmacy networks at the end of the day, and they've been focusing a lot on how do I what's the system to bring them together and manage the patient experience via pharmacist confirms because they're on this treatment, they might qualify. How do I do outreach? Who does outreach? Who consents them? All of these things. I know they've been building that out and needing the industry's help to achieve the infrastructure to support the end-to-end. I identify a patient is on these medications, consent, and let's call it the pre-screen, and then perhaps there's the transition to the site. My understanding is they're still kind of needing the outside infrastructure. I'm just not sure exactly what they plan to do as far as have in-house versus outsourced. But I think that for vaccines, since we've seen such a huge diagnostics, since we were talking about that earlier, asthma, diabetes, I think we will see them begin to play more and more of a role from a patient identification standpoint. But I don't know about them actually conducting the study at a pharmacy. Like, to me, that still seems, I haven't seen anything yet where that's been delivered personally, but perhaps there's stuff I don't know.
I mean, I can't envision that, but who knows? These guys have a lot of money to throw around. I'm sure if they want to try to figure it out, they will. I'm going to give a shout out just to Dan Sfera out there, and also just quick plug for Save Our Sites, saveoursites.com, upcoming conference, guys. Check it out.
I'm coming.
Yeah. You're gonna be there, dude. It's gonna be cool. Look. I don't go to many conferences. It's not really my scene, but as much as people may not believe it, I'm actually like super introverted. But I am excited to meet a lot of people and people I've talked to throughout the years doing this stuff. So
well, it's a great time. I mean, since I see Jeff on the call as well, I mean, I think I know Jeff was. I think I was either at the first Site Solutions or the second one, and obviously now it's thousands of people. And
right.
It's still a great meeting, but I feel like it's a good time to do something that's site focused again. That's smaller, intimate, and make sure that those topics are covered without any outside influence of.
Well, it's tricky, I mean, you want everyone's voice, but also like they tend to get dominated. Site's voice tends to get sort of drowned out, sometimes I feel. So I do appreciate the opportunity to kind of go small again. So to speak to Dan's point here, look, he says when sites get bigger, they lose efficiencies, which seems counterintuitive, right? I mean, isn't the idea of like rolling up a bunch of sites is to create more efficiencies through standardization? I guess what would your take be on that? Because I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, I know that for me it's easier to be small than it is to be big, but I'm also not a private equity backed network. I'm just a small fry. So I mean, what's your take on that?
I think that if the consolidation strategy can present inefficiencies because of all of the moving components, for sure. I think sometimes people want to achieve a lot, and it's you still have people from both businesses trying to get to know each other, and that takes that has its own delicacies. But scaling your site business, since we haven't really talked about it as much, I mean, when I think of so some tips and tricks, let's say you're scaling your business or before you're entering a process. And I'm saying that because I think that you should have these things to scale your business, and definitely have them if you enter your own process of any type of transaction. So the lever of the level of sponsor concentration is a big one. I see a lot of sites that have 20-30% of their revenue from one sponsor. I know that's that could be limiting in a lot of respects. It could be a red flag to some companies, and it should be kind of a red flag to you. Like, it's not, as long as you're aware of it, figure out how can you more diversify across other companies. Perhaps you're relying on them too much. Be prepared to stay with the business for a couple of years. I'm still seeing like 3 to 5 years being very, some obligations are 5 years. I'm seeing some a bit more flexible in the 2 to 3. If you have an infrastructure in place that the business can run without you, I think that you can easily talk to more of a 2 to 3. Maybe you can even go less, but just think about that, because I think that plays into the duration as one component with how is your role viewed as you move forward. Have the CTMS, have the systems so you can produce the data, your financial reporting. You have your patient population, which Brad, we did talk about this in the last one. Like, you own what is a site? Well, it's like, to me, a CTMS is a great short answer, because it holds all of the information about your business. So it defines your business in a lot of respects, your metrics, your patient population, your financial data, brings it all together, and enables you to say, this is what my business is. These are my patients that have consented into trials. These are my patients I reached out to, but perhaps haven't consented. Here's what our data looks like, etc. Just 2 more: accrual-based financial reporting. Cash-based businesses at sites that takes a while to transfer from cash-based to accrual-based. Accrual-based is going to be substantially easier for any partner. Some partners don't even want a cash-based business at all. So if you're not sure how to take it from cash to accrual, I do think investment banker is a good one. But I mean, an accounting firm, any kind of accounting firm, I think should be able to help you from tips and tricks, perhaps even help you, move it over. And then, have when I say systems and processes, let's keep it to the basics. Like, do you have a month-end closing? Do you have a budget that you generate? Are you tracking revenue to the budget? A pipeline, we talked about that. Do you have, a pipeline that you're reviewing and seeing what's projected success and how does that drive your business decisions? So.
No, I love that. I love that lightning round of of tips for sites. Because again, I think it's really easy, and I know for me, especially those first couple of years, you're just trying to keep your you're trying to keep your head above water, right? You're just trying to do whatever's directly in front of you, and it can be difficult, or it can be easy rather, to sort of lose sight of making sure that you're actually building a attractive business, especially if you do want to get out of there at some point down the road, right?
Yeah, because I used to say, from a evaluation perspective, that one site, you might be somewhere, if you're 1 million EBITDA, or 1 million net income based on the people on the call, or perhaps you're less, but you're probably at somewhere between like a 5 and a 7 multiple, and then you have multi-site companies that are more 10 or higher multiple. I still think today, from an evaluation perspective, with the macro environment, you're still seeing that. But the point is, if you have some of these things buttoned up, your evaluation will improve, because you can show a scalable. If you don't have multiple sites, you can show a site that could be scalable because of what you have in place.
No, I think that's great advice, and something I've wondered about when people have come at me with offers about multiple. And I've always been curious about what kind of multiples of EBITDA we've seen, when it comes to sites, because there's not a lot of there's not a lot of research that can be done about that, at least that I've seen. So that's actually really interesting to hear, because I've seen some embarrassingly low offers. Not that my site is balling out of control, but some of the offers I've seen have just been like, why would I do that when I can make that in a year?
Is it after like one conversation and you send them your balance sheet and P&L, or is it?
Pretty much, yeah. Well, sometimes, more ongoing conversations, but after they've taken a look at P&L and look, again, it's sort of like, I don't know, something that keeps me going is that the potential is like insane.
Yeah.
For if you're operating a site, because it only takes, it's nice. The idea of having like nice, predictable growth is great. But I think what's really interesting here is that, like, you can go nuts in a year and make cash like crazy, depending on what's going on. Now, the downside of that is you can lose your shirt in a year too, if things aren't going well and if you're not well positioned. But I feel like that's the trick, right? Is staying lean enough to survive the tough times, but being buttoned up enough to take advantage of the good opportunities that come. Again, especially for a smaller site like me, where I don't have a bunch of money to throw around to necessarily maybe have somebody. I don't have somebody who's just making phone calls all day to find studies. I'm not built up that big at this point yet.
Yep. Well, yeah. If you have, I know based on time, but if you have a study coordinator that's, like, to me, it's like, if a study coordinator can generate 750,000 a year, you have a really good infrastructure, but you have a lot of support that's being provided to that study coordinator. And this is a very generic thing I'm stating across any therapeutic area. But some businesses, if you're between 500 and 750 from a coordinator in revenue, and then that decision that Brad has, or any site has, which is, it's an extremely tough decision, but it's like, wait, I'm going from me doing a lot of these things and filling in holes and gaps to a next step, which is maybe 10 coordinators. And at that point, you might need a site manager. And then, do I want that type? Like, it's like, to me, that that part of the infrastructure from phase 1 to phase 2, which is probably like taking a lot of your day-to-day stuff with patients like off your plate, That's the hardest thing I see with sites to make, because the staff wants to be in there, and I understand, but if you sat back and you kind of said, look, if I can plan this thing, because of what I've done really effectively with 3 to 4 coordinators, if I do double what I'm doing, I'm just keeping it very simple, what does that look like? And then where do I need to be in that? And that's probably a large fundamental shift, and it tends, you probably have to learn new things that you don't know now too. You know
Well,
what I mean?
and no, this, I mean, I wish we had talked more about this. I know we're getting up on time. If you're good, we can go a little bit over. If you need to bail, you can.
I can go. Yeah, I can go. Over.
I've had to deal with this, like, not moral, but quandary, like, a bit, right? Because I've been there. I've been there at a few different phases already, throughout just my short time. And look, I don't really care about selling my business. I mean, maybe that'll change someday. I'm sure it will. I'm not 40 yet. So I got a lot of time. I got a lot of time to work on some of this stuff. I like what I do. I love what I do. So I've intentionally stayed very much in the mix. And frankly, I know that's probably not a good idea. Like, from an objective standpoint, the way I'm doing things is probably not, the right way to do it. And I'm okay with that because it's what I choose to do. But I think that is a very underrated point you're making. Like, and again, I've something I've struggled with a lot is like, well, it's just more problems, right? I feel like more money, more problems. That's how it goes. So, like, the bigger you get, the harder the decisions are. But I think that's okay too. I think it's okay if you want to be in the business, like, be in it. If you don't, then yeah, make that jump. But I think when the time comes, it'll be hard, probably harder than it should be, for me to back away from it.
But yeah, it's obviously. I mean, I could share this perspective because number one, I'm not 40 yet either, and I did sell, so I did the thing that that you said that you're not doing. But why did I do it? Because this is important. Like, what do you want is very important. And I don't. It's not like you have to know that answer really really well. But in the business, like, one thing I knew, and COVID actually forced me to think about this in other ways, but we were always growing something in ClinEdge. We were always growing something new. And I don't know if I've ever really admitted it until COVID started happening, when it's just all of the, some of these, like, projects that we were doing, that were growing something that we just had to put a lot of stuff on hold. And then we weren't in the business. Like, I wasn't, I'm like a in the office kind of guy. And I love being with everybody, like figuring out challenges. And but that stage when it's like chaos and nuts and trying to figure stuff out, and over communication, and like, I love that stage. Now, based on our size, I think we hit a point where not only did Elligo, were they the right partnership that we felt for us, and we had to have a lot of conversations to, of course, figure that out. But also, it's kind of like, well, what, I want to kind of start. We were a pretty big company at that point, and you're dealing with HR and stuff. That's just, it's not that I like doing it. It's just I like
It's
these
different.
other things more.
Yeah.
And the point at the end of the day is, for Brad, I tend to see a lot of people that want to think of a sell, but then you kind of get into the weeds with it a little bit, and it's like, they don't really want to sell. They just, grow another site, grow a therapeutic area, contract another position, like, find that thing that you love, get this set up. And to me, it's fun to think, can this setup that you're doing over here and that's really working well, can I bring that and do it here too? And can I do it here? And now you're, like, onto this thing, but you don't have to, like, think of the sixth one. Just go from here to here,
Right.
and then go from here to here. And maybe you need capital, maybe you don't. But that, I know this is like probably a very expanded way of saying it, but it's most sites. It's they you can tell that you're going to be fulfilled by doing something a little bit different than we're doing now, because they just want to try something new or do something different, or put their feet in something and not completely go into something altogether, right? So
yeah, that's fair. And I think for me too, and probably a lot of other people who start sites, I mean, some of the appeal is that like I don't really have to work for anybody else, right? And especially if you're going to be on the hook for another 3 to 5 years, and then instead of the guy running the place, you're an employee at that point. That's not necessarily the most attractive option either. But no, to your point, there's a lot of things you can do to scratch that itch, maybe without starting back over or just completely cashing your chips in. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Believe me, talk to me in 5 years once all the rest of my hair is falling out and I'm on hypertension medication, then I might have a different story. Might be ready to sell at that point.
Well, yeah. Well, two things. I mean, you could do is maybe you can figure out how to join like 2 networks. Maybe you join a DCT company. And I'm just going to use Science 37 since everybody knows them. But maybe you figure out, can I somehow be a partner of Science 37? And the goal of those things, not just of the scope of work and the partnership, is you're going to learn some new things. For example, Elligo, we are doing what's called patients first studies, and we're centralizing some of the trial design, which some sites are like, wait, no, I do this. Why am I going to have you do this? And there's like a heavy conversation around the scope of work. But then if I can like get 15 minutes with you, and I'm like, hey, here's some of the reasons that why we're doing that, but we at Elligo still need to think that what you tell us, we need to make sure we factor that in to have the optimal delivery model as a site-focused company. And if we're not doing that, that's different. But even though this isn't ideal for you, give it a shot, and only give it a shot because you can see what is working and not working. Because we'd like to think that we are on the cutting edge of figuring those things out around sites, but you might be resilient to it because of what you know. But I'm the guy that's sitting there and being like, well, Brad, just maybe you don't like that this happens, or you see less revenue here, but give it a shot because of thinking, how does that apply to the broader industry? And can you take and learn and apply that to your own business or your own plan and how you're growing sites, right?
Yeah, well, and I think now is a great time as a site for that. I'm working with a lot of different, whatever you want to call them, vendors, DCT companies,
Good.
And trying those things out, just what you're talking about, because I do think, hell, first of all, it's fun, right? I mean, isn't that why we're doing what we're doing, to try to do a better job at it? So the only way we can do that is by trying those new things. And I mean, I talk a lot of trash, but I'm still out there, working with and, trying to help those companies. I think, again, now is a really good time because there's so many like emerging solutions that haven't found their fit, and they are looking, to get input and work with sites. So, if you're a site, I think it's worth, discussing or trying to partner with in different ways, some of these companies. And who knows what you might find, who knows what rabbit hole that may take you down, that you're like, oh, unless I had put myself out there and tried this, I never would have even known this was an option. So that's kind of what we're, where I'm at right now. So I think that is really good advice.
And maybe the last thing I'll say on this, though, just because I love that you think that way. At the end of the day, when there's many, and I keep saying Brad, like Brad isn't site, but there's many sites that are Brad, you coming together to have a voice to the sponsor in some sort of united front, I think is what networks, and I think is what everybody is trying to do, but there's still a lot of work to be done. But I would argue that's one of the things that has been the most exciting to me is, especially on the network kind of model, is I'm seeing sponsors listen and take action. And, some of these things don't linger. You still have the occasional protocol design that doesn't apply to anybody, even though the site's, said it doesn't apply to anybody, that comes up out of the blue. But I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing like huge improvements. And COVID, I'm sure, helped drive that as well. But that's why I'm always sitting here like, hey, just give it a shot. Just, learn it. And just be a little bit more agile, which is all we can do to help promote, and hopefully the feedback that we give will be useful and be provided back in a good way
And
to the study.
to your point, I do think, look, there's a lot. I mean, I'm not really unique. I'm not. There's a lot of me all over the country, starting up sites, running little networks, running trials in their communities any way that they know how or that they can, and I do think a great benefit of, people like me is that we are agile. I don't need to go ask a board if I can try something. I don't need to go ask my shareholders if it's okay, if I partner with this company. So like we have that unique ability, I think, to try and push the envelope a little bit, maybe more than some of these big companies where, you got to answer to a guy who, gave you money, So I think there's some strength and maybe some unique, characteristics of sites like mine. And again, they're all over the place. I think more than people realize.
100% agree. Couldn't agree with you more. Yeah. So how do you take it and provide value back to the study? Is I think what we're going to continue. I mean, it's just what we're going to continue to see evolve with the study infrastructure, the study design evolving with it. But anyway, I know we're also
we've gone over. I mean, I appreciate all the people who hung in there, and I know we couldn't get to all the questions and whatnot. But where can people find you online and reach out to you if they have questions?
LinkedIn is still the best. Oh, this is great. I didn't see all the. Looks like I know most of these people. So yeah, LinkedIn is the best. Otherwise, Christian.Burns@elligodirect.com. And happy to answer any of these outstanding questions individually if it applies. So, Brad, I really appreciate you having me, and love what you guys are doing. Love the idea of the conference. Since I think everything you guys are doing is around doing what we talked about here, which is giving sites the voice and helping improve and talk about areas that we can all be better as sites, which is tremendous. I mean, it's massive that you're doing that. So thanks for having me.
Keep evolving, and man, thanks for coming on this time. It's all on tape, so nothing to worry about this time around. So yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate you coming back and running it back with me.
Absolutely. All right.
So we're signing off, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.